hydration is everything after a head injury. You've got to make sure that the brain has the volume it needs to heal. And hydration is a huge part of that. Supplementation is also a big part of this as well. And kids these days, like oftentimes we think they have what they need. Well, unfortunately, our food isn't what it used to be, so they don't. So I always encourage people to work with maybe like their functional medicine doctor ideally, but not everyone has one of those, to get on a supplement regime after head injury to help them navigate and help their brain get the minerals and nutrients that it needs as it heals.
Hi, I'm Lauren Parsons.
And I'm Andy Jackson, and this is the ALWELLCO podcast.
Dive deep with us as leading experts share their unique perspectives on topics such as recovery, sleep, movement, and the latest innovations in the space.
Well, welcome, Sarah. It's a real pleasure to have you on the ALWELLCO podcast. I've been actually dying to get you on this podcast, so it's fantastic that you've come to join us. Before we dive into kind of your unique perspective and what you do, could you start by sharing with our audience how we met and how you got brought into the ALWELLCO community, please?
Yeah, so you and I met, I want to say about 8 years ago when I was in personal training through Vivo. I was looking for a barefoot shoe, honestly, and another personal trainer from Boulder connected me to you and was like, this guy is going to hook you up and you're going to be in love. And I haven't worn another sneaker since.
Very cool. I didn't realize you guys knew each other that long.
Yeah. And then from there, obviously, we've just we have a ton of mutual connections through other business ventures that you have. It's really good.
Yeah, very, very awesome. Okay, let's jump in. So you have this really exciting project, Omni Neuro and neurofeedback. You're the founder of Omni Neuro, and you're a specialist in neurofeedback. Just for the layman, can you explain what neurofeedback is so people can understand what that is and what that your job entails as part of a neurofeedback specialist?
Yeah, so neurofeedback is a non-invasive approach to retraining the brain's electrical output. To not overcomplicate it, a lot of times people look at the body and they look at the muscle, the ligaments, the bones. The brain is no different, right? And what we work on at Omni Neuro is the electricity of the brain. And the electricity of the brain plays a significant role in our mental health, whether that's on the scale of mental wealth and really prospering and in the space of peak performance, or whether that's a mental breakdown of a trauma or a head injury, or whether that's a mental illness that has been running through your DNA through centuries, right? So we really retrain the brain's electrical output to allow for people to clear the fog, to allow them to step into their true self.
Cool. And I saw that your mission emphasizes expanding consciousness and empowering performance. Can you walk us through what neurofeedback and quantitative EEG are and how they work together to achieve your mission?
Yeah. So brain mapping, which is the quantitative EEG, allows us to take away the shame that we feel for not having mental clarity or poor decision making. It paints us a really beautiful picture of what our brain is doing so that we don't have to guess or wonder what is wrong, right? Or what is really right with my brain, right? It allows us to paint this picture to say, hey, this is how your brain's performing. Here's some things that we could do better. Here's some things that it does really, really well, and allows you to understand more about yourself in a really, really objective way. What we love about this is that our mission is to expand consciousness, but also knowledge, right? And knowledge is a huge part of how we move forward in life. If you know your calorie deficit allows you to lose weight, you're going to eat a calorie deficit if you really want to lose weight that fast, right? So if you know that your brain is not optimal in certain areas, you're going to do what it takes to expand your consciousness around that, right? So when we go into expanded consciousness, that became a part of our mission, because what I noticed as we trained people is that sometimes after 10 sessions, they were like, I don't notice anything. But what are they doing? They're eating better. They're drinking more water every single day. They're waking up ready to go for the day with more vigor, more purpose, more passion. And they're listening to their intuition and with stronger purpose and clarity. And then as far as peak performance, that's just really, it just comes with it, right? When your brain's performing properly, it's when it's communicating front to back, side to side, you're just on. Your brain works better. You can transition and go from work mode to family mode, from family mode back to just the expanded consciousness space, prayer, mindfulness, like whatever you want to call it, you can transition better when your brain is communicating better.
And I know we're going to get into this later with some of these graphs and charts that you provided, and thank you so much for that. So when we walk through them, is there a difference between the EEG versus the color map I see here? What are some of the terms that we kind of need to know before we get into it?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. So EEG is the raw form of what we record to get a brain map. Okay. The raw form, the EEG, is definitely the most customized way to look at the brain. We use EEG to really decipher more neurological challenges, maybe potentially epilepsy or even potentially head injury. Okay. If we need to look deeper, we can go that route. Okay. Now there's the brain maps that you see with kind of the color coding that you see, and this is based off of an algorithm. So we're taking into consideration other people, this person's age, to allow them to understand how they're doing overall, right? It'd be like me or you stepping on a scale and saying, oh gosh, which I hate the BMI, but my BMI is a little off, or my body fat percentage is off for my age, right? It's very similar to that. So a brain map allows you to understand how you're doing with the general public, and EEG allows us to understand how you're doing yourself.
Okay, very cool. So what drew you to this field? And did you have any personal experience that kind of influenced or inspired your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had been looking for this for the last 20 years, if I'm honest. I went to school for interior design at the University of Nebraska. I moved out to Colorado, which is a very physical state. And then I quickly got into personal training because I noticed when I was working out more, my brain was working better. From there, I got into nutrition. And in nutrition, I started doing fitness competitions. However, when everything was dialed in, I was dialed in, but I was still tired all the time. And so I was like, there's something else going on with my brain. And anytime like I strayed off of my diet, something was off still, like word finding, whatever it was. Well, then I found EEG. I had an EEG done and they were like, oh, you have really significant head injury. And I was like, oh yeah, I've got like 6 of those. I was like, the first one left me with a lazy eye. The second one with extreme word finding issues. Third one really didn't allow me to be super successful in school, right? Because I couldn't stay awake during morning classes. I couldn't stay up past 7 o'clock because I was chronically fatigued, right? So I really found it through falling in love with it myself. When I had my brain map done and I had the knowledge as to why my brain wasn't processing like it should have, I was like, oh my gosh, like everyone needs to know about this. Mm-hmm. Then I did my first handful of sessions. It was after my 3rd session that I woke up and I was like, is this how people feel every day? I was like, what? It was like a weighted blanket had just been pulled off of me. I was in a relationship at the time too. And every single time he would come home, he'd be like, what's wrong? And I would like tear up. And I didn't have words. I was like, I'm fine. Like, what are you talking about? But my emotions were telling him differently, right? And that went away. I was able to articulate my feelings, explain to him what was going on with me and why I had emotion, and like logically work through conversations instead of just emotionally shutting down. So I had an onslaught of symptoms from my head injuries that just kind of grew over time. And neurofeedback allowed me to kind of bring everything back and get back to a version of myself that I didn't even know existed because I had had head injuries from such a young age.
So yeah, you mentioned what sort of head injuries are we talking? Are we talking concussions? What are we talking?
Yeah, so one was, you know how when you're a kid and you swing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and mm-hmm. try to go as high as you possibly can. Well, like there was this thing in one of ours, and it was the goal to like kick it, right? Well, I kicked it, but I fell off. Right. So I fell down from about 30 feet, hit the back of my head. And that's when I got my lazy eye. That kind of healed itself. Kind of. There was a lot of insecurity and confidence issues because of that over time. But, I was young enough. My brain was plastic enough that it was able to kind of rebuild some neural pathways for me. Then I had a water skiing accident. I think I was 17. then. And I basically, hit the water back to front and woke up on the boat. And my dad was like, get up, shake it off.
Mm.
And then the third, unfortunately, I don't like to tell this story, but it was a drunken college accident. I fell down the stairs. In that moment, I broke my arm. And so we went to the doctor, and the doctor looked at my arm, but they didn't look at my head. And so that went unattained to, I guess you could say. And then I did have another one where I was T-boned in a car accident. That one was probably the worst, which really re-woke up my word finding issues. And so I'm still kind of healing from that one. That one happened about 6 years ago, and I just haven't put the work in for that one.
That's fascinating to hear your own story. So let's take this a little further then. So as you work through this, you're obviously encountering all sorts of people with, let's just call them brain health challenges at this stage. Yeah. What do you frequently encounter, and can you share, with obviously without names, but share some of the most severe and complex cases you've worked on?
Yeah. We get a lot of people that are confused as to why their brain is showing up the way it is. That's just a general scope, right? It's like, this goes into this topic. So I have adult ADHD. This is my favorite thing. Because when they come to us, they're like, I have focus, attention issues, and they like to label things, right? And 9 times out of 10, individuals do not have adult ADHD. They have symptoms of adult ADHD, in which case, typically a head injury is the root cause of it. Okay. We see this in professional sports all the time. People they get into professional athletics, they get into professional sports. Then 2 years down the road, they're like, gosh, my focus is off. The doctor on the team prescribes them Adderall or some kind of attention or focus drug to help them stay on point. But at the end of the day, like, it's an ischemic issue with the prefrontal cortex, which isn't allowing the brain to absorb and take in the oxygen that it needs due to head injury. So that's kind of like, I would say that's generally like what we see a lot of. Like 70% of our clients are people that think they have focus issues. They don't. They have head injury issues. There's questions that we ask on our intakes to allow us to know what we're probably looking at, to kind of gently walk them into, hey, let's start not using this word and using potentially this word instead. But symptoms can come up from that, right? Like if you have an old head injury, the symptoms look different. Just depends on where in the brain it's impacted. Like short and long-term memory can go, your word finding can go down, your sensory integration, which is like walking into a restaurant and being able to like be present with the person sitting across from you without being distracted by everything going on around you. Right. And that would be more of an imprint on your sensory system, but also your occipital region of the brain, which is your eyes. And we now know, thanks to mass knowledge in podcast world, is that our eyes are an integral part of our brain. And if they're not working appropriately, our brain is going to be easily distracted and not going to flow front to back, side to side, like I said. I would say probably one of the most extreme cases that we've had head injury wise was a gentleman that, bless his heart, he was on E470 and an older woman had a flat tire. And he got out to help her change her flat tire and was hit by a semi. So he came into us like long, straggly hairs, like a year and a half after the accident. And he's like, I've had 5 people tell me I need to do this. And he's like, it just didn't make sense to me to do it. And so finally comes into us a year and a half later. We get his brain map back. We're like, hey, this is what's going on. This is how long this is going to take, this process. Like, it is a commitment. And I was like, well, what's your main goal? He was like, I want to work again. I want to provide for my family again. This is a mathematician. Like, he studied economics. So with that, like literally 30 sessions in, he had a new baby on the way. 30 sessions in, he started picking up the accounting books again, kind of helping friends and family out when he could. 40 sessions, he was like, okay, I'm ready to stop neuro because I'm ready to go back to work. And we're like, whoa. Like, we have to help your brain go back to work too, because that's going to be a whole other challenge for it, right? Because continual effort's different than sporadic effort. But less than 7 months later from year and a half after his accident that he had reached out to us to see improvements. He's back. He's got another baby on the way. He's working full time. His hair's cut. He's like back to his normal self. He's not depressed. He's not anxious. He's not dealing with sensory stuff. He still has a little bit of short-term memory stuff going on. But like, again, it's an ischemic thing. Once you've had a head injury, people often say, like, you can heal it completely. I don't agree with that. I don't think you can, especially when that head injury happens as an adult. Now, you can heal it differently. I do believe that. Like, over time, your neural pathways can rebuild differently, but it just takes time.
Just quickly, if you're enjoying the episodes thus far, it would mean a lot to us if you follow and subscribe. Your support helps us continue to bring on incredible guests and share meaningful conversations and stories. Thank you for being a part of the journey. You mentioned oxygen as an issue. Is that something you can physically see on the EEG, or how do you know that that's the case?
Yeah, it's a thing called alpha ischemia that we look for. Alpha ischemia can basically, there's like a phase lock and a phase jam that happens in an EEG, which are kind of the squiggly line picture that I sent you to. And we can see that alpha coherence can come from that. We've seen this a lot in long haul COVID clients, that this disparity in ischemic activity is real, right? That's how they knew how significant my head injury was, because I do have this, right? So getting oxygen to the brain is everything. That's why, like, I think, and this is maybe placebo, but when I go to New Orleans to see some of my players, like, I feel great every morning. Where here it's just kind of a little bit slower alertness, right? Because our altitudes are so different and our oxygen intake is so different.
Interesting. So there's going to be a lot of people who are parents listening to this. They've got kids in youth sports. There's a lot of worry around, particularly NFL, rugby, any type of contact, hockey, these types of sports. Can you tell us a bit about, for example, what is CTE? It's a thing that a lot of people talk about. Are there other associated problems with youth sport and head injury, etc.? They don't necessarily mean, CTE seems to me like the extreme. So what are the levels? Tell us a bit about youth sport and the dangers, and what are your thoughts around that?
So, CTE is hard for anyone to speak into at this stage, unfortunately, just because you cannot diagnose it outside of death, right? Repeat head injury is essentially what that is, where tau protein basically starts to kind of break down the brain, right? Now, when we go to youth sports,
what is it? Sorry, just to jump in. So a lot of people might not know what tau protein is. What is that, and what does that do?
So tau protein basically is the breakdown of neuropathways, and essentially, like, the chemical output starts to kind of eat away at the brain. But just, I don't know, like, we still don't know if it's like, is tau protein like something that, is it a disease, or is it just a scarcity of the brain? And so it's trying to produce. We don't, there's not a whole lot that I've read into that yet. I do encourage anyone that is in professional athletes to go to, I believe it's the concussionfoundation.com, and donate your brain after death. This is for sure something we need more of. And it doesn't matter if you're a professional athlete or if you're collegiate, right? Like, that's what we're trying to figure out, is how soon does this activate, and can we catch it, or is this something that we need to regulate to where youth athletes aren't being exposed to it. Now, what I have seen in head injuries, as far as youth are concerned, when the brain's not permanent, so between, around 25 is usually when it starts to become a little more concrete. I always say, like, kids, can they bounce back? Yes, if we give them the time. That's the problem, is we don't give them the time, right? We have these impact tests, we have these concussion tests on the sidelines now, which is great. And it's a huge push forward to look after kids. But oftentimes these kids want to play, right? They don't want to miss out hanging out with their friends on the field or on the rink, right? So they want to play. And so they are the ones pushing for it. So what I encourage is parents, like, educating your kids on what this could mean for themselves in the future if they choose to keep going into it, and let them make choices outside of that. Like, knowledge is everything. right? And sometimes kids aren't going to listen to their parents, and that's okay. That's what, that's what coaches are for too, to outline, hey, it's not an appropriate time for your kid to come back 2 days after a head injury. But, like youth are youth, and they're going to want to play, and they're going to want to persevere through hard things. And I'm not here to say don't do that. I'm not here to say, don't play football, don't play hockey. Like, these are things that build skill sets in kids oftentimes. So for me to sit here and say no, but it is like, if a kid has a head injury, like, you need to take it seriously. Hydration is everything after a head injury. Like, you've got to make sure that the brain has the volume it needs to heal, right? And hydration is a huge part of that, right? Supplementation is also a big part of this as well. And kids these days, like, oftentimes we think they have what they need. Well, unfortunately, our food isn't what it used to be, so they don't, right? So I always encourage people to work with maybe like their functional medicine doctor ideally, but not everyone has one of those, to get on a supplement regime after head injury to help them navigate and help their brain get the minerals and nutrients that it needs as it heals.
So there's a whole world out there now which is about MMA, Ultra Fighter. I heard one the other day that's called Slap Something, where two people stand in front of each other and they slap each other in the face. And they do, obviously you've got the contact sports like hockey and rugby and NFL and college football, etc. Mm-hmm. You are a mum of a kid, etc. Where would you draw the line in terms of your worry about this? What would you say to other parents when they're looking at picking a sports team or a coach, etc.? What safeguards would you say to them?
Well, we don't idolize football, hockey in our home. I always say, if you're going to sit around watching other people live their dream, you best be standing around trying to live your own. So we don't idolize those types of sports in our home. That is, if he chooses and he's like adamant, I want to play football, like flag football all day long, for sure. I think that's why the NFL is really starting to dip into that space, because they understand that it's actually a really fun sport to watch, right? But as far as like navigating like what you want to do with your kids, if they're already in it, like they love it, right? They are learning skill sets. I do encourage parents to do that, but I would encourage you to interview the coaches and help understand, like, get to know them and what their skill set is. Do they have old head injuries? Do they know how it feels? Or are they sitting there telling you that you don't, and they played 10 years in college, or they played 10 years of contact football, right? So I would always ask, are they aware of them? Do they believe that they exist, first of all?
Yeah.
The next thing I would say is, how long is the time off if a head injury happens, right? Some coaches will say, oh, it just depends on the kid. That's true. But ask a follow-up question. Okay, well, if it's a severe head injury, what are we looking at? If he says 2 weeks, I would probably just know that you're going to have to monitor that as well. Okay. But at the end of the day, I think choice is choice, right? If you choose to let your kids play sports, then you have to choose to be strong enough to pull them when they need to be pulled.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've mentioned a couple of times that your neurofeedback revolves around you mapping the brain. Mm-hmm. So it sounds fascinating to me, brain mapping. Can you explain to what that entails and what it can reveal about someone's brain health, strengths, areas for improvement? So first of all, what do you do in brain mapping? How does it work? And then what does it reveal about people's brains?
Yeah. So brain mapping is a non-invasive reading of your electrical output. It kind of looks like an EKG coming across the screen, but in 19 to 30 different sites in your brain. Okay. During that time, we're looking at your brain passively. So in that passive space of 10 minutes eyes open, 10 minutes eyes closed, we can then see certain tendencies of the brain, whether there's some underlying epileptic patterns, if there is high alpha in the posterior region of the brain, we know that someone's sleeping very well if that's the case. We can see beta spindles, which do give us kind of an insight on if there's any kind of oxidative stress happening in not only the brain, but the biology of the body. We can see, hey, like you make decisions really, really well, don't you? And they're like, oh my gosh, yes, I run a, multi-billion-dollar company, right? We can see misophonia. We can see a lot of like diagnostics, but unfortunately in this world, we're not able to diagnose using this modality yet. And I think with technology and AI, we're going to be able to do that a lot sooner than we thought, to allow us to help prescribing psychologists actually be able to give the right med to people when needed, right? But brain mapping in general just allows you to understand your brain. Like for me, I had an old head injury, so word finding, I was like, yep, you got it, right? And they were like, oh, you rev the engine all night long when you sleep, so therefore you wake up really tired. Yep, you got me there too. You can be kind of impulsive. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and when your impulsivity wears out, you get a little angry and temperamental. And I was like, yep, that's me all day, right? So it allows people to understand and match what they believe to be true of themselves with some objective data. I think I have been in a map review of probably 3 people over the last 9 years of being in this space where they were like, nope, that's not me. Right.
Interesting.
So people do tend to like call us the science psychics, right? Because we can objectively look at these electrical patterns and say, these are the tendencies that your brain has. Does that feel real? And they're like, yeah. And out of those things, what would you like to see improve? Okay. And then we go into the neurofeedback scope of this is what we would do to help these areas of the brain improve. Right. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And just quickly, you mentioned some of the types of waves. Can you go into what each are and what they mean, just in case someone listening doesn't know, like alpha, gamma, things like that?
Yeah. So starting with the slowest brainwave, it's delta. Delta is a 0.5 to 3 hertz frequency. Delta is the most closely associated to our Oura rings, our Whoop bands, all of these wearable devices that we wear. It's responsible for our deep sleep. So our access to deep and transition into and away from REM. Okay. But I like to tell people like delta is like your garbage disposal of the brain. It allows you to say, oh, this is important. No, this isn't important. Let's clear this out. It allows us to rest, repair, and restore. So if someone like me has an old head injury and I work out on Monday and I get DOMS, delayed muscle onset soreness, on Thursday from my workout on Monday, your brain's probably not resting and repairing and restoring as well as it could. Okay. 80% of an infant's life is spent in delta. Right. And they're learning how to bring their hand to their mouth. They're learning how to eat out of the womb. They're learning how to sit up and giggle. Right. So all of those things are survival mechanisms for kiddos. And as we get older, this frequency kind of gets a little left behind. Right. So then we have theta. Theta is a 4 to 7 hertz frequency. This is our ability to feel calm. Have you guys ever been in a room of someone that should be really stressed, but physically they're like calm as could be?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's someone with overactive theta, right? And overactive theta allows them to look as though they're very calm, right? Now, have you been in the opposing situation of being around someone that should be calm, but they're clearly not?
Mm-hmm.
Many of them.
Yeah, much more of that.
That's underactive theta, right? And underactive theta definitely doesn't allow someone to sit down and watch a movie with their family at night, right? They're the ones still up, washing dishes, doing laundry, and then laying down at 10 o'clock and really just kind of sitting there still on, right? Mm-hmm. But theta plays a huge role in our creativity. It plays a huge role in memory. And it plays a significant role in, again, our brain's ability to feel calm and at peace. Alpha is our stress manager. It's an 8 to 12 hertz frequency. And alpha being the stress manager, it also acts as kind of this transitional brainwave, which allows us to go to sleep when it's time and allows us to turn the car on when it's time. Okay. So if alpha is our transitional brainwave, it has a lot to do with our mood, right? Our ability to take in information, process it, and stay calm. But oftentimes, when we see people with underactive alpha, that can be a sign that there's been some kind of childhood trauma. It can be a sign that there's some kind of environmental or toxin going on biologically if their body is consistently not budging in this frequency. But again, it's the stress manager. So we do kind of look at alpha as being one of the most important brainwaves, because when I see someone on the scope of mental illness, it's probably because they have this underactive alpha. right? Because their brain doesn't process information appropriately. It doesn't tolerate the stress of that information appropriately. It's kind of like having a queued printer, right? You send information to the printer and then the printer's just queuing. And then you have to delete everything to get it to print one job, right? Or turn it off and turn it back on, right? If our alpha's not flexible and if it's not working for us, that's what you're going to be dealing with all the time. And that is going to create a very stuck sensation and a very like a chronic overwhelm sensation. We have beta. Beta is more of our drive brainwaves. It allows us to turn things on, learn new information, stay motivated, have discipline. I like to think of low beta as kind of being the sponge. You're kind of filling your brain up with information. And then regular beta is kind of the sponge that you're wringing out. And you're saying, ooh, I learned all this information. I better wring it out and teach the rest of the world. Right. So for us in the space of Omni, like we're always working on the peak performance side of that brainwave to say, hey, it's cool if you have this sponge and you want to wring it out. You just don't want to wring it out too fast. Right. Because if we wring it out too fast, it bleeds into our high beta band, and high beta is the brain's fight or flight. Now, there is a time for fight or flight. Don't get me wrong. But when it's not working appropriately, it can send us into burnout really, really fast. It can age us a lot faster than any of us would like to age. It can push anxiousness. It can put more pressure on our organs all the time. Our nervous system is constantly aroused, right? So high beta is not something we want to see a brain going into very often. But when it does, it has a really awesome co-partner, which is gamma. Gamma is the brainwave a lot of people are talking about in regards to ayahuasca and ibogaine, all of these amazing psychedelics that are helping people tap into a higher knowing, which is what gamma is. Gamma allows you to have this expanded consciousness, this ability to like solve problems without a ton of conscious thought. Now, gamma can either help you or it can hurt you in a really bad way, right? So when gamma is not in sync with the rest of the brain, we've heard stories of, hearing demons, negative thoughts, right? Any kind of oxidative or biological issue that could potentially be going on in the body kind of clings to this brainwave, right? Sure. And it can very much so and very quickly go negative if that frequency doesn't work well.
So Sarah, is this one of those things that it's like a Frankenstein movie? Do I sit there and you put this big metal thing on my head and these things go into the side of my head, or am I going through an MRI machine? What does it look like, the brain mapping?
Yeah. So the brain mapping is, I have a cap here. I don't know if this is a full visual, but basically it's this little cap and it sits on the head.
Oh, it's like a little cloth cap. Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of like a swim cap. That's what I always
say.
Okay.
I've worn one of those before.
Pieces, yeah, with metal on them. And the metal allows us to conduct the energy from the scalp of the brain into this big ribbon that goes into an amplifier. The amplifier sends that content into our software, in which case we can see the EEG in real time. So it's very, very similar to...
so no Frankenstein stuff here.
No Frankenstein. You kind of look like those top hats with the spinny things on the top.
Yeah. You just look a bit weird.
Yeah. So this is the brain mapping side of things. There are many different ways to train the brain. There's Amplitude, there's Z-Score, there's S-Loretta. We, in our offices, kind of have the creme de la creme of softwares to allow us to train the brain, which allows us to do all of the above. So when people come in for sessions, they're like, "Oh, do I have to have this cap on every single time?" No, you don't. Oftentimes we're going to be training electrodes and not necessarily putting the whole cap on someone every single time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so and thank you for this. I'll pre-frame this with, we have some real information with us. Of course, it's been approved by you and both the client, so we aren't looking at anything we shouldn't be looking at. But we wanted to look through a real case. So this case that we are talking about in particular today, can you describe the background and the condition of this client based off of their results?
Yeah, so this client is in his 60s. He came to us with, "Hey, my memory is just not what it used to be. I'm kind of curious to know what's going on with my brain." And so what we did was we were like, "Oh, well, let's take a look." Knowing that his history was repeated heading of the soccer ball over and over and over again. because that was cool back then, right? I think it's still cool now, but I told him not to do that ever again. Uh, so we got him in the seat finally, and we just did what I explained. We put the cap on him for 10 minutes, eyes closed, 5 minutes, eyes open. We were able to see the raw EEG. We did need to rule out some things because there was some medical history stuff that was coming up, and we wanted to see how much of that was coming from the brain as opposed to coming from the body, right? So when we got the data back, I'm not sure if you want to show that or not. So with that, we got his data back, and it was exactly what we were thinking it was going to look like, with definitely some occipital head injury stuff. We saw alpha coherence. Alpha coherence is another word for the ischemia that we mentioned earlier. So there was an oxygen issue in both his occipital region and the prefrontal cortex. Now, this client did have a little bit of heart stuff going on. So what our approach is, anytime that there's a heart thing going on, it could potentially be brain-based, right? And if it is brain-based, we want to make sure that we're reducing any form of inflammation as we're training the brain. So we do use a V-light infrared conductor through gamma frequencies to reduce that inflammation, to let the brain know, hey, we're in here to help you. We're trying to reduce the inflammation so that we can build new neural pathways here. Okay. So we start with the light system first, and then we go into certain regions of his brain that we found in the EEG. Now, the other image here is going to show the spectra, I believe. That one showed the most occipital damage, right? So we should have overactive alpha in this side of the brain. It helps with processing. It helps with higher intelligence. However, this client's was like above the norm.
Okay.
And it was so far above the norm that it's impacting the processing, right? So while this client came into us, oh gosh, my memory's off, right? Well, it's not necessarily a memory, it's a processing issue, right? So the brain is only taking in what it can perceive, and it's saying no thanks to the rest. Right. So while this person is probably very successful because they're super smart, they also are very selective on the information that they're taking in, where 10, 15 years ago and 300 headers later, or previously to 300 headers, that probably wasn't the problem. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So then as we age, while our processing speed goes down, a lot of people chalk it up to, oh, I'm just getting older. Right. And it's like, yes, your processing speed does go down as you age. However, there's a lot we can do to slow that down from happening. Right.
Sure.
And because this person did played soccer for so long, that it just created a lot of repetitive motion. And because of that repetitive motion, the brain kind of landlocked in a few areas, and it wasn't allowing it to process information. It's more in a survival state.
Okay. And we can tell the occipital issue because of the red in the back of the head. Is that what we're essentially? Okay. Gotcha. So that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I'm sorry, were you going to say something more?
The EEG you're looking at too is this client compared to this client. So we're not looking, when we get kind of a case like this, we don't like to compare this person to other people because his metrics are going to be completely different than someone else that hasn't headed the ball 500 times.
That makes a lot of sense.
So we want to look at it individually and not just through the algorithm.
Okay. And so based off of what you saw here, what training did you prescribe essentially, or what interventions were most suitable for this?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that's had a history of head injuries, we definitely recommend IVs, right? Any improvement in the volume of the brain is helpful for us. As we age, our brain just shrinks, unfortunately. So any type of metric that can go into the brain to improve volume, and that could be IVs, it could be hyperbaric chambers, it could be vestibular exercises, it could be a lot, right? But neurofeedback being one of them, we take the intervention of taking our multimodality approach, which is the V-light, so the infrared light on the brain, as well as retraining those circuits of the brain with neurofeedback. Okay.
This is more of a personal question just because I've gone through it, but in his particular case, because the occipital region was impacted, would something like vision therapy help?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we're talking about all that kind of stuff.
Definitely like I love sending people to
I've done it and it's amazing.
Yeah.
Changed my life. Mm-hmm. So that makes a lot of sense.
Especially like whiplash cases, people that are hit from behind, those are really good candidates for that. Strokes. We're
Okay.
noticing a lot of strokes in people that are young right now, which is like nobody knows why that's happening. But yeah, anything that impacts the occipital region is going to definitely, we love to send them out to neurovisual therapies.
Perfect. And then as far as the training goes, what's the frequency, duration? I mean, what are we talking about here as far as training it back into a better state?
Yeah. 2 to 3 days a week is what's recommended by research. We do have some clients that can only afford 1 day a week, and we work with it. It's just going to take time and patience. But 2 days a week is what's shown for research purposes to get clients in. Each session is 45 minutes to 60 minutes, depending on the modalities that we're using for each person. Actually, the neurofeedback scope, you're only training about 20 to 30 minutes of that 45 minutes to an hour. Okay. So yeah, I mean, oftentimes people like it because you're not sitting in front of a therapist talking about your feelings or having to do all these crazy like neurovisual training mechanisms, and you just sit there and you let the neurofeedback do its thing. I am a huge advocate that our brain can't always consciously change. It has to subconsciously let go and release, right? The best way I know how to put this is like, you don't choose to have sleep issues. You don't choose to not be able to fall asleep. So who are we to think that we can consciously choose to do that all of a sudden?
Sure.
So I definitely like helping people understand that there is a subconscious element to all healing when it comes to the brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a huge part.
Yeah.
So how do you gauge improvements? How often do you retest, and when do you know it's time to kind of adjust what you're doing?
Yeah. So every single session we can read metrics, right? So if someone comes in at a high beta frequency starting at a 30, that should start below a 10. We know every single session when we're starting lower and lower and lower and lower. Once we get to 3 sessions on that site and it's starting within the healthy metric, we can come off of it and move on. Right.
Okay.
Or add in, right? And we can stay on these certain sites, especially if they're head injury based. We like to stay on these things so that, they get as much repetition as possible, right?
Yeah.
A good example is if someone's quad dominant, it's very hard to make them hamstring dominant, right? So repetition is going to be everything. Where if we go back, like objectively, we're remapping people every 15 to 20 sessions. That is ideal and standard in this field. If you're not remapping, unfortunately, you're just holding back your practitioner from being able to help you more, right? So we remap every 15 to 20 sessions. We subjectively track changes every 10 sessions. The first 10 sessions, people, it's pretty rare for someone to say, oh my gosh, I noticed this huge shift and this huge change. Typically it's their spouses at 10 sessions telling us how much better they're doing. And then around like 15 sessions is when people really start to be like, oh gosh, I feel it now.
Okay. Yeah.
So subjectively and objectively.
Very very interesting. Yeah. Hey, you mentioned a bit about IVs and blood volume and things like that being important. There's so many brain health supplements on the market now. Everyone talking about focus and brain health and etc. Have you got specific ones that you recommend?
Yeah.
Let's start there.
Okay, so our nurse practitioner has spent years with us trying to understand like what are the best supplements to help people. Not everyone has a $200 budget for supplements every month, so I'll just give you kind of the top 3, and then we can kind of go from there, right? So the top 3 would be definitely omegas, okay, creatine. So that's a very underwritten supplement, unfortunately, because we look at it to build muscle, and it's actually really good for the brain. And then magnesium. Different forms of magnesium are going to be helpful for different people, but generally speaking, glycinate is going to be the supplement you want to use for your brain. Okay. Outside of that, if someone is like, oh gosh, I want more, we do tend to recommend CoQ10 and then some form of B vitamin. I believe another one on our platform is curcumin. I don't know. I always murder the way that you say that.
Yeah. Sounds weird.
But CoQ10, curcumin, and gosh, what's the other one? And then some form of B vitamin. It just depends on what their blood work is showing, what they're needing in general. Right.
So there's a lot of debate around big pharma, pharmaceuticals, etc. There's a whole new wave of holistic approaches, natural approaches. But I remember having a conversation with you before about a particular drug or pharmaceutical that you liked after your concussion. So how do you balance the pharmaceutical versus the holistic natural supplements? How do you balance all of that for brain health?
Lifestyle. I think, for practitioners, like we have to meet the client with where they're at oftentimes. And that's why big pharma is what it is, right? Oftentimes people come in distressed and they only get 15 to 30 minutes with them. And so they do what they do to make them better, right? They're meeting them with where they're at. But when I say meet them with where they're at and talk about lifestyle, it requires change and putting your foot down. If I have clients that are coming in gaming 5 nights a week, and they're like, I'm not getting any results, I'm literally going to put my foot down and say, okay, like, well, we've done what we can do here. You're not doing your part. I'm not here to take your money. I'm here to make you better. And you're not letting us help you with that. Right. So I don't think that, I don't love for big pharma to have such a bad persona, because it's the practitioners that are billing for insurance that only have a certain amount of time with them. And it's not the practitioner's fault either. It's just the system. It's super broken. And at the end of the day, we have to be advocates for ourselves. We have to look into the side effects. We have to understand these pharmaceuticals as if it's like a class that we took in high school or college. Like, you have to be hungry to learn about what these things that you're putting in your body. So I think it's a personal responsibility thing. Now there is a place where people are on 4 or 5 things and they don't know what to come off of. We are happy to kind of objectively help clients navigate this with their prescribing doctor, to give them, help them push forward and how to come off of some of those things if they need to. But for me, it goes back to genetic mutations. Right? There's genetic mutations, and we put pharmaceuticals in front of understanding what those mutations are and supplementing what those mutations are, and not putting a Band-Aid like a pharmaceutical over it.
When you went through the list of the various, supplements that people should take, what you didn't mention was something I keep hearing over and over again. I keep hearing this thing called NAD. Can you explain what NAD is? Where does that fit in the brain? I've heard about you can inject it in your arm, you can take it through an IV drip. Can you just talk about NAD? It seems to be a hot thing at the moment for brain health.
Yeah, I mean, NAD, speaking into the chemical and the chemistry of NAD is a little beyond me. But what I do know of NAD is it's basically a precursor to ATP. ATP is the energy sources of the brain or of the body, right? I take NAD almost every day orally. Now I have gone and taken IM NAD, and I have also done IVs. It just depends on where you're at. What I've been told is that when you take NAD through an IV, and if you have really negative symptoms, that means your body needs it. Right? If you take it and you don't have any negative symptoms, then potentially your body is fine on the ATP and mitochondrial restoration. But, I think everyone's different. I don't think it's a very expensive supplement to be trying and not know that it's working. So I always push people towards their practitioner to ask that question, to say, hey, is this something that would work for me? And if they say, no, you're good, your cells rejuvenate really fast, that's not something that you need, then you're fine, right? And if they say, yes, you should, well, which way would be best? Orally, IM, or through an IV? But unfortunately, that is a little bit above my pay grade.
No, it's fascinating. That's our world we live in, isn't it? There's always something that, I think everyone says at the moment, you got to take a certain amount of grams of protein per day per body weight. That seems a hot thing. Jumping in an ice plunge pool. NAD seems to be it. So it's really good to get professionals like you to give us the view on these types of things. Well, obviously prevention is better than cure, and obviously everyone hopes that they don't have brain damage, etc. So what are your top 3 preventative practices you would encourage everybody to adopt for better brain health?
The cheapest ones I would recommend are silence. Silence, our grandparents used to sit on the front porch and just watch cars drive by, right? They didn't have a phone. They didn't have coffee in their hand. They weren't trying to think about their future. They just allowed, right? And I always tell people 10 to 15 minutes in silence every single day, right? Whether that's if you're in the sauna, don't bring in your headphones, right? Like just sit there. It's hard. It's very hard until you get used to it, and then try to build up that time. The second thing I would say is sleep, paying attention to sleep hygiene. We are in a very modern world where there is light when we shouldn't have light. So I would say like the, blue light blocking glasses are great at nighttime if you're someone that does need tech and screens later in the evening. If you're not, and you can go Laura Wilder, Old House on the Prairie, candlelit after the sun goes down, better yet. But technology boxes, right? Like especially with people with kids, like 8 o'clock, all tech goes into the box. Right. You can sit and watch a movie that's different for attention and focus than it is to watch short skits and scroll through your phone in 30-second reels. Right. So I'm not saying no screens, but I'm definitely saying like reduce your dopamine intake as much and as often as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And then brain volume all day, hydration. It's everything. So,
yeah. So before we close out, I'm going to give a spoiler alert just because I want to ask how it's going. And the selective memory really hit home for me. So Andy, as our client here, how's it going with this neurofeedback, and have you noticed any improvement, or what's it like?
I mean, it's fast. So so just so everyone is clear, is that 60-year-old soccer
who has selective memory?
Selective memory is me. And I am definitely not one of those 3 people who said that wasn't me. It was 100%. Right. It's quite fascinating, the training, in terms of you sit in front of a screen, you put headphones on, you have electrodes on, they then play with these various chirps and sounds and etc. So the experience of it is quite interesting. You do it with your eyes open, your eyes closed, etc. The first couple of sessions, I had a couple of interesting reactions at night, which Sarah and I spoke about. I had some flashing between my eyes and so on. And you explained, what was that term you said? What was happening to my brain there?
So we added the gamma light for you. And the gamma is the area of your brain that's kind of like the neurons aren't connecting, right? So when we add gamma in, it gives the brain the ability to heal a lot faster. So what was happening there is like basically your neurons were finally kind of connecting, but when your brain is asleep, it's resting, repairing, and restoring, as we mentioned earlier. So your brain is actually working to heal.
Was it retort you called it? You gave it a name. You said your brain was not retorting. I forget what you said. You said something about, you must have meant repairing.
Word finding.
I can't find. Oh, maybe that was your lovely assistant Alex that explained to me what was going on. So that's been quite fascinating. I've only done the first 3 sessions, so I'm about to go into, from next week, I'm starting the actual. She said on my occipital region next week. I start my sessions on that, and I'll happily say the reason why is that my memory is shot.
Yeah.
It's but I did like the fact that you did say that this person was super smart. I did like that bit.
Well, it's just like, all right,
you can't say all bad.
I'm kidding,
Andy.
Yeah, I'm kidding. So for those interested, and personally I am, after hearing and going through this and kind of just my life story as well, right? I've had some head injuries myself. But for those that are interested in understanding their own brain health, what's the best way to learn about Omni Neuro and schedule a session with you, or just get more information to figure out if this is something they want?
Yeah, I mean, go to the website. I like to have conversations with people that have have looked at it. They know how to say neurofeedback. They're a little more bought in. When people are bought in, we get way better results, right? Because their brain has kind of submitted, right? So I always encourage people to go to our website, navigate through it, click any of the buttons, and that's going to send you to email us and get connected. We also have a wonderful Instagram page we're always trying to push for knowledge across the board on that, and not try to feed your brain with negative nonsense that doesn't make sense. So you might get a little bit of a brain overload when it comes to that page. But Instagram, our Facebook page, LinkedIn, you can find me there. Our website, we have a couple YouTube videos up too that kind of help explain what the process is and what we do. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So I know we're going to meet shortly to discuss some of the business aspects here, but we have a lot of people here who have their own clinics. They have their own facilities, etc. Is there a way that people like that could contact you about potentially looking at it from a business opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love doing consulting work and helping people grow. There's oftentimes in this neurofeedback world, we speak over people's heads, and that gets lost and it doesn't get downloaded well enough to get the sale, to get the opportunity to change someone's life, because that's what this does, right? And we are so blessed to be able to be in this space, and more people need to know about it. So I am all about helping people advocate for their businesses and kind of clean up some things that might be pulling people out of their offices sooner than they'd like to. Yeah, so finding me on LinkedIn would be the best way to go about
I mean,
that.
I was going a little further than that, because where I go for my sessions with you, you're in this cool performance center.
Mhm.
So that combination of you working with athletes on the brain and with a performance center seems to work
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Surely there are opportunities for you to partner with other performance centers.
Yes. Yeah. So that's our business model, is we focus on optimizing other facilities with what we do. Right.
Great.
So we are in Resilience Code, which is a functional medicine clinic that is also focused on peak performance. And then we're also in Kula Sports Performance, which is a speed and agility clinic. So we definitely we love pocketing ourselves in other performance clinics, whether that's cognitive performance or if it's functional medicine or say a med spa that's trying to optimize how their clients feel about themselves every single day. We are a really beautiful complement to all businesses that are looking to add another revenue
That's
aspect
great.
and change their clients' lives.
Well, this has been fascinating.
For sure.
It's exactly as I'd hoped it would be. So as we wrap up our conversation today, we always ask the same thing that's really close in heart to our podcast, which is strength, kindness, perspective. You showed a ton of strength, a lot of perspective, but let's show a bit of kindness to somebody. Is there somebody who embodies these values for you, somebody who's influenced you, mentored you, that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Yeah, I would say Jay Kunkelman is one of the godfathers of EEG, and there's a lot of red tape in the neurofeedback world, and he has without a doubt told me, Sarah, just fly. The world will catch you. Keep telling people about this modality, because you've seen it hand in hand work for yourself and every single brain you touched. He is more on the technological side at this point, but he's getting ready to retire. So I just obviously want to give a shout out to him, because he has been how I've learned everything I know in this field. And I probably owe him an entire business model.
Just quickly before you sign off, don't forget to visit network.allwellco.com and join our professional network. You'll get to enjoy exclusive benefits from brands we love and have access to a community where learning and professional development are always at the forefront of everything we do.